Hey everybody, I am Carrie Sheffield and welcome to justthenews.com. Make sure to tune in for our interview today. It's going to be good. We've got a policy expert for the Trump campaign who is working very closely with the Trump campaign. His name is Curtis Ellis. He is policy director for America First Policies. He is traveling with the vice president on what they're calling the Great American Comeback Tour. We are going to go through and learn more about what this tour exactly is, and is there actually a Great American Comeback in store for us. Welcome, Curtis.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Carrie.
So, Curtis, we know you're traveling with the vice president. You're going to be going to Michigan, which is obviously a battleground state. What exactly do you want folks to pick up when you're doing these quote-unquote comeback tours?
Well, we want people to pick up a couple of things. Number one is that the American economy is strong. The fundamentals are strong. And another thing to pick up is don't be afraid. All right? We need to get over any fear. The fear is almost worse than the virus. We've had this fear pandemic, hysteria pandemic, that somehow it's not safe to go out, it's not safe to do anything. And that can be holding the economy back as much as the fear of the health implications, the physical health. So those are that fear bit is by being out there on the road and having an audience of a couple hundred people together and talking. We're doing these at businesses that have been open through the entire pandemic. You have people who've been working at lathes, working at laptops, working next to their colleagues, and none of these people have gotten sick. So that's a very strong message just in and of itself. Most important is what we need to do to build an economy that's even better than the blue-collar boom, the one we saw before the pandemic. And make no mistake, it was a great economy. Thanks to the program of tax cuts, regulation cuts, trade reform, and energy reform, we got this economy going. President Trump got this economy going like gangbusters, like something that people haven't seen in a generation or more.
So, Curtis, can you tell us, some people are talking about this phrase, a V-shaped recovery. Break down what exactly does that mean, and do you think we're in a V-shaped recovery?
Yeah, what it means is you can see a recovery that either goes like a U and it's slowly uphill and gets up there, or what we had with President Obama, after the Great Recession, the financial meltdown, there you had an L-shaped recovery. It just flatlined. It never really did get, I guess it would be L-shaped like that, I don't know. And it never really did go anywhere. V is, it went down fast and it comes back fast. And that's what we're in now. I believe very strongly that that's what we're going to see. That's what we're already seeing. We saw in May a jobs report that defied all expectations, the most incredible addition of jobs in recorded history.
Well, and I want to ask you about that because there's been some dispute about how those calculations were determined, that it's people were saying by some analysis that the U.S. Census Bureau and the way they were categorizing people, that the unemployment rate should have actually been higher than was reported. Is the president being too optimistic here because of this flaw in how unemployed people were being categorized?
Well, anybody who's going to say the Census Bureau is being messed with for political ends is truly engaging in conspiracy theorizing. I've worked in the Labor Department. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is the most insulated organization, insulated from political pressure that has ever existed. It's housed in a different building than the Labor Department. They can't even run into career or political appointees in the lunchroom, in the cafeteria at the Department of Labor. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is insulated, and the same with the Census Bureau. And actually what we've experienced throughout this administration is that the career employees, the permanent government of the United States of America is biased, if anything, biased against the president, and they're going to find a way to turn out the most unfavorable interpretation of figures and statistics and policies that they possibly can to make the president look bad. So anyone who says the Census Bureau or the Bureau of Labor Statistics is messing with the numbers to make the president look good is truly delusional.
We're glad to hear there's no lunchroom bullying going on in the federal government. We'd hate to see mean girls at the federal level, but
well, actually, there is, but it's in the other direction. It's that you don't get to sit at the cool kids table if you're known to be a Trump supporter. I can tell you, at the cafeteria at the Francis Perkins Department of Labor building, I worked there, and somebody came up to me in the cafeteria and said, "I'd like to talk with you," and they said it in a very low voice. And then through Proton Mail, they reached out to me to tell me that they were Trump supporters, and there are actually more people in their sub-agency that support the president's trade policy and his policy towards China than I would imagine, and they wanted to pass me the intel on that. But it was done very sotto voce and very under the table. So there is lunchroom bullying going on. Don't make any mistake about that.
well, I feel like that could be a movie in and of itself. But Curtis, I want to ask you though, there are some concerns about yes, there is a V-shaped recovery we're seeing in the stock market, and certainly the investor class seems to be very optimistic, and the blue chip firms are optimistic. But what about the average Jane or Joe, the average person? We're talking specifically about consumer debt. We already know consumer debt has been very high in the United States, as on top of student debt. People who might have been living on credit cards to survive during the COVID shutdown. Are you worried, and is the campaign and the president, the vice president, are you worried about an overload in credit card debt? And could that then later dovetail into a shutdown in consumer spending? We did see today some very high consumer spending numbers here on Tuesday, but are you worried that in the future, are people just kind of floating on their plastic on their credit cards right now?
Floating on their plastic raft. Look, as people go back to work, they're going to be earning more, and that's a good thing. The concern right now is the fact that people are on this augmented boosted unemployment, and that's providing a bit of a disincentive to go back to work. The fundamentals of the economy are strong. We're going to see people going back to work. We're going to see business resuming activity. The high levels of debt is a concern. That's one of those, I almost would say, structural problems. This is a long-term problem we've had. And the reason we've had this problem, not just in this administration and not just in this pandemic, but for quite a long time. First, you had accumulation of household debt, people borrowing against their mortgages, borrowing against their home equity, then living on credit cards, borrowing against credit cards. And the reason is there's been a lack of good paying jobs. All the better paying jobs were sent to China, were sent to Mexico, were sent to low wage countries as part of this really terribly misguided, awfully flawed policy of globalism. That it was really, they were teaching it in the business schools that the way to boost your stock price is to get rid of Americans, get rid of American workers and replace them with cheap foreign labor. They didn't realize they were replacing their customers as well. The Chinese aren't buying American goods. The Mexicans aren't buying American goods. When you fire your workers, you're also firing your customers. And that's what's going to be changed as we rebuild the great American economy, as we engage and move forward in the great American comeback. We're talking about bringing supply chains back to the United States, getting out of China and bringing them back here so we can reinvigorate that virtuous cycle that we used to see in generations past.
And how is that going to happen? Are you, what policies specifically do you endorse, giving an infusion of cash or allowing immediate tax deductions for companies coming back from China, pulling the plug back here, bringing firms out of China? What are the mechanisms that the campaign is looking at to endorse for what you're talking about?
Well, we see there's actually quite a bit of legislation being proposed in Congress. And what we're talking about here at America First Policies is the use of tax incentives, the immediate expensing of capital expenditures on new plant and equipment in the United States. That's one very, very substantial policy, very substantial mechanism that would be very positive. Larry Kudlow has spoken of that, the National Economic Council director. He's mentioned that. Look at what the administration just did. Here's another one. The administration just put forward an executive order buying $350 million worth of pharmaceuticals, worth of drugs and medicines that could be used in an emergency, in a pandemic, that will be stored in a stockpile, an emergency stockpile, like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve will have a strategic pharmaceutical reserve. Now, what's important about this is that instead of buying this from existing companies, they use this purchase order, if you will, as to set up a new company, to create Flow, P-H-L-O-W, Flow Corporation. It's an American company, a private company, a startup company that will be producing these pharmaceuticals in Richmond, Virginia, using the most advanced manufacturing techniques. And this is a prototype of what the government can be doing in other industries in many ways, using the purchasing power of the federal government as a guaranteed market for new companies to start producing in the United States. Because, you see, this guaranteed market is an incentive in itself. I'll set up a company if I know I have a customer. Well, the federal government buys more than many nations on earth. And we're not just talking about medicine. You're talking about LED lighting, automobiles, steel, electronics, services, office supplies, paper.
Sure,
this should
Curtis,
all be made in America.
Well, let me ask you something, Curtis, because we here at Just the News, we have a daily poll that we release with the pollster Scott Rasmussen. Now, this is Scott the man, not Rasmussen Reports. Some people will get a little confused. It's a separate entity, kind of like Kate Spade the woman versus Kate Spade the brand. But Scott Rasmussen the man is working with us on a daily poll. And we reported this yesterday, and he said that if the president, if the election were held today, the president would lose. And Rasmussen was at the forefront of predicting that Trump would win in 2016. So he's someone certainly who has a very good pulse, a track record of understanding where the president stands within the sentiment of the public. And according to Rasmussen's analysis, a lot of this really has to do with the economics, that when the economy is sluggish, that an incumbent president is in trouble, and that when an economy starts to recover, we saw this with H.W. Bush, there was a lag time, that there's often a lag time of several months before people feel comfortable and are willing to give the incumbent a chance politically. So all these things that you're talking about, what's the politics of this if Trump is not able to win? Or how are you going to accelerate this obviously Trump is sort of his own political character, but again, this is Rasmussen's data. How concerned are you about the timeline here of the politics and the economics being a lag indicator?
Absolutely need to have President Trump reelected to get these policies in place, because Joe Biden and his crew, the people around him, are very pro-China. They're very pro-globalism. They are constitutionally opposed to the idea of economic nationalism and national self-sufficiency. They want to see the erasure of borders for people and goods and money. They want to see the free flow of capital and people and money around the world. This has been the mission since Woodrow Wilson of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And it's absolutely poisonous to the American economy. It's what's led to the high income inequality. Now, let's look on the other side of the coin here. The American people, in poll after poll, trust President Trump to rebuild the economy far more than Joe Biden. So this V-shaped recovery is crucial to the president's reelection chances, very important. And that's why you see blue state governors like Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom in California and throughout the country doing their best to keep choke off any recovery, to keep people locked down. Now they're basically pimping the Communist Party of China's line that there's going to be a second wave. You see China put out information that Beijing's on a wartime footing because there's a second wave, because they got 57 cases of COVID. This is meant for American consumption. They're trying to spook the American media and these blue state governors to keep the economy shut down, to keep small businesses shut down. It's no accident that the small businesses that have been taking it in the neck because of this shutdown are all Trump supporters. The big businesses, the Wall Street, government, large retailers like Walmart, they're all supporters of the Democratic Party and Democratic politicians. This is no coincidence. The big players have been doing quite well through this whole shutdown. It's the small players, the small businesses, and the average American who can't work from a laptop, who work with their hands, that have been hit hardest. So we need to get this going again. And President Trump has been very outspoken about the need to reopen the economy. It's good for the country. And as you point out, it's certainly the American people trust President Trump to rebuild this economy because he built it in the first place. He's the one who got this boom going. President Obama said those jobs will never come back. President Trump brought them back.
So you don't think if there was a President Biden that these supply chain reforms that the Trump administration and even some Democrats in Congress say they want to proceed to have happen, you don't think that would happen under a Biden administration? No,
absolutely not. President Joe Biden has been bought by China. His kids have been bought off. This is how China works. They buy family members. They basically bribe the members of influential politicians and influencers in the president's camp to get them on their side. And then they give out these soft messages of play nice with China. We need to collaborate with China in order to solve the world's problems, things like climate change and global inequality and the pandemic. These are all problems created by Beijing's beggar thy neighbor economic trade policies and its other misbehavior. So you look at what happened in the 1990s with President Clinton. He ran as he was going to get tough on China, get tough on the butchers of Beijing after what happened at Tiananmen Square. As soon as he got elected, China used people like Larry Summers and Robert Rubin and Gene Sperling and Sandy Berger, people in the president's camp. Rubin was head of the National Economic Council. Larry Summers was a undersecretary of Treasury. These are people who are all pro-free trade, and they said, no, you got to keep doing business with China, engage with China. That's how you're going to help the reformers and not the hardliners. That was all a ruse. And then you had the campaign donors, the major campaign donors to Bill Clinton, people like Bernie Schwartz over at L'Oreal, saying, we've got to keep engaging with China. And what that meant for Bernie Schwartz and L'Oreal was give China our missile guidance technology so I can launch American satellites on Chinese rockets so the Chinese rockets don't blow up on the launch pad. As a result,
it's interesting you mentioned Larry Summers, because Larry Summers is now at Harvard, and there has certainly been some controversy with Chinese ties to Harvard professors. As a Harvard alumni myself, I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered with that. Curtis, while we have you, I want to get your thoughts about some reporting we've seen from Bloomberg and elsewhere about the president preparing potentially an infrastructure package. And Democrats in Congress say they want an infrastructure package. Bloomberg News says this could be up to $1 trillion. But then you've got Republicans like Mitch McConnell who are saying, hold your horses. We don't need another big spending boondoggle. This could put the United States in further debt, further deficit. What's going on with the president? Is the president going to push forward for a large spending program for infrastructure? And would you advise him on this?
Infrastructure has always been part of President Trump's platform, right from the 2016 campaign. Talk about rebuilding America with American steel and American workers. And America First Policies did a poll and found this is tremendously, tremendously popular. We've got like 79% of the people support the largest infrastructure project in history. A $1 trillion project, $1 trillion program would be exactly the right thing to do. We have to close the loopholes, though. We want to make sure we use American steel in building the bridges and American cement and American workers in building out our roads, bridges, ports, broadband, everything else.
But is the timing right for this, though? Because we've already spent 2 trillion, 3 trillion, and however many trillions this COVID will end up causing our economy in slowdown. Is the timing right for infrastructure right now?
Well, absolutely, because the borrowing costs have never been lower. Interest rates are so low now. That's when you want to borrow money, when the interest rates are low. So this is exactly the right time to be borrowing money to do something like this, and we absolutely need to do it. It's interesting. I got on the issue of American steel. I just had a conversation with a businessman who is in the steel business, steel distributor. When the tariffs were first put in place, he was complaining about it because the price of steel went up. He doesn't make steel. He buys it and sells it to other people. And now he says business has never been better as people are reconfiguring their supply chains. Folks who used to buy steel from China are now buying from him in Tucson, Arizona. His business has never been better. It's zooming. And this is exactly what an infrastructure project would do. We use American ingredients, American components in rebuilding our infrastructure. We will be creating jobs and we'll be creating entire industries. Remember, the Transcontinental Railroad, built under the Lincoln administration, stipulated that the steel rails had to be made in America, even though the British rails were cheaper. Because as Abraham Lincoln put it, when we buy goods from foreigners, we get the goods and the foreigners get the money. When we buy it from Americans, we get the goods and the money. And that's the crucial ingredient and the crucial formula for the great American comeback.
Well, I'm a girl from Utah, and the Transcontinental Railroad ended in Utah. So, fun fact for our viewers. That's right, promontory point. Put that on your summer vacation list, everybody. Curtis, I want to ask you one last question. We here at Just the News, we did an interview with Congressman Jim Jordan looking at the question of investor class visas. So as I understand it, it's only 10,000 visas, but these are highly sophisticated investors who are allowed into the United States through green cards because the rationale is that they will invest significant amounts of money, speaking to your point on money, in American businesses. And Congressman Jordan's concern is that there is no vetting process, there's no national security credentialing or analysis about whether these investors could pose a national security risk to Americans. And what we're seeing is that Chinese investors are dominating this class of visas and green cards. What are you hearing from the campaign on this issue, and would the president support putting some sort of national security analysis on these visas?
The president has been very clear about boosting the national security vetting of many of these foreign nationals, particularly Chinese nationals, that are benefiting from our economy. We've seen a closer scrutiny of the Chinese students that are studying at universities and somehow magically end up working on research projects for the Pentagon and other high-tech basic research funded by the U.S. government. There's a whole host of Chinese universities, Chinese military universities that are sending their students here, shutting that down. Congressman Jordan is exactly right. We need much closer vetting and scrutiny of these people that are trying to benefit from this basically visas for sale program, because it's twofold. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know where their allegiance is. But when they start pouring all this money into American enterprises, what they are doing or could be doing, and very subtly doing, is buying influence in America. Suddenly those companies that have gotten an influx of Chinese money, they perceive their interests as being with the Chinese and the Chinese government. They see their business interests as being with the Chinese. This is something that China is very aware of, by the way. In the 19th century, the Chinese empire opened itself up to foreign capital. And what happened was the local businessmen in China started to identify with the foreigners and to identify with the foreign capital. And those local elites, those local businessmen, essentially became lobbyists for the foreign capital. And that's what we've seen in America, that American businesses that have business interests in China are lobbying in Washington for pro-China policies. That's, as I was saying before, Joe Biden is a great example of that. The people around Biden are examples of that. Larry Summers is a great example of that. And so as we bring in these visas for sale and bring in these investor visas, the money that's coming in is serving China in two ways. It's creating influencers in the United States, but their influence is going to be to push the Chinese Communist Party line in Washington. And this is very dangerous. As a matter of fact, Japan was very aware of this after World War II, and even before, because beginning in the Meiji Restoration, when Japan first industrialized in the 1800s, they barred foreign capital. They did not allow foreign capital into Japan because they did not want to see their local people, their national business people, compromised in this way. So we have to be very careful about this visa for sale program.
Well, and it's a very interesting point you bring up on history and ancient cultures and ancient people. America, by comparison, we're just a baby, and we have a lot of growing pains, or maybe we're an adolescent at this point. But Curtis, Ellis, we appreciate your time today, and we'll be watching you from the road as you take your great American comeback tour. Keep us posted.
Will do. Thank you. It's been great talking with you, Carrie.
Thank you. Take care.